Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, criminal court, and other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. And if you have a tale to tell, you're also welcome to contact me there at dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com. I have a brand new guest on. I have Michael Clark on. He has written the book, The Truth About You, and it's a novel that challenges the myths about domestic violence. And he wrote this story with a clear purpose to challenge and change the narrative about domestic violence. And he wanted to humanize those of us who struggle to shed light on the deeper causes of harmful behavior and spark real conversations about this huge social issue that affects all of us. And he is also founder of Ananias Foundation, which was started in 2017. I welcome you, Michael Clark. I know a lot of people ask me, and I'm sure they ask you, how did you start writing this book and why did you start writing this book?
Marianne, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show. And to your question, so why did I write this book? So through my work with the Ananias Foundation, we work with perpetrators, people who cause harm in domestic violence and intimate partner relationships. And I have the privilege and honor of hearing so many of their stories. Plus, a part of the background that you did not give, I'm a former domestic violence offender. So
Mhm.
20 years ago, I was arrested for domestic violence. So I can relate to their journey as well. It seemed to me that our society in general, our dominant narrative about domestic violence is not just a little wrong, it's way off the mark. And again, as I not only took my lived experience, but also the stories of the hundreds and hundreds of clients that I get the privilege of working with, and I hear their stories, that narrative is really getting in the way of us actually addressing this issue in a constructive way.
Mhm.
And so this is just a story that has been brewing with me probably for years and just felt like it's one that needs to be told, like you said in your introduction, to start a conversation
Mhm.
about domestic violence. What causes it? Who does it? And why do they do it? And more importantly, what can we do to address it so that that person changes, so that they are no longer violent or abusive in their relationship? And because we're starting at the wrong place, because we're starting with the wrong assumptions, we're not getting to the right conclusions.
Mhm.
So that was my idea for writing this book.
Mhm. And it's interesting because I think a lot of it goes back to people's childhoods and how they were raised. And it seems like no one's digging into the childhoods and what happened back then.
Right, right. So true. What we assume about domestic violence is primarily that we men perpetrate domestic violence and abuse on women because we want power, we want control in a relationship. And while that might be true, I can tell you there's just a sliver, a fraction of people that that would be an accurate description of. The truth is, both men and women can be violent and or emotionally abusive to their partner.
Mhm.
The truth is what you just said, that most of the time that is a response to childhood trauma and wounds that they experienced. We end up being overly sensitive to all kinds of situations and are reacting in a way to protect ourselves from being hurt, from having our self identity injured in that relationship, and then we overreact in sometimes in violent and abusive ways. It's not an excuse,
Mhm.
but when we understand the right reason, then we apply a different solution.
And what solutions do you bring up in your book?
Yeah,
Or
this book talks a little bit about those solutions. The work that we do in the Ananias Foundation. Well, let me just compare and contrast because traditionally in batters intervention programs, they're modeled after what's called the Duluth model. This has been around for
Mhm,
decades, and it assumes that men are doing this out of a power and control mindset. And so, what does that prescribe for a solution? Well, we need to knock that attitude out of those men, and we need to, re-educate them that being more egalitarian in your relationship is actually what you should be doing. The problem with that solution is that that's very seldom the cause. And
mhm,
so I know when I went through a batter's intervention program, I heard those same messages, but it didn't really resonate with me. It's like, yeah, but I don't really think that way. Yeah, that's not really what's going on in my worst reactions. And so when we start with the right solution, um, based on the right cause, which is to dig into those childhood wounds, those traumas. What messages did we receive? What messages should we have received? And how can we reinterpret that? How can we think about that differently now that we're adults so that we're not so sensitive? And one of the main characters in The Truth About You,
mhm.
the stepfather, Greg, does talk about what he's learned through counseling and how the batter's intervention program wasn't particularly helpful to him, but those realizations that he got through counseling were, and they were helping him to manage his emotions and to address his behavior. So we do talk about that a little bit in the book.
Mhm. Because a lot of people are judgmental and they think
Sure.
people aren't going to change, leopards don't change their spots.
Right.
But I think there is there is some element that some people are able to change. And maybe there are some people that can't.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a good judge of whether or not someone can't. I think all of us are capable.
Hmm.
Part of it starts with being properly motivated. When we're shamed, when we're put under, the spotlight of punishment, that turns out to be a very poor motivation for change.
Hmm.
One of the approaches that we take is to talk to people about what's going on in their life. And a lot of times they have, things aren't going well in their relationship. They're concerned that they're going to lose that relationship or they've already lost that relationship, and that hurts them. And so we really talk to people about what's going on and what they can do to make some changes so their life would be better. And I think that's a much more motivating message
Hmm.
than the shame and the finger wagging of you bad person, you shouldn't be doing this, you need to behave differently.
Hmm.
So that's a really big start. And then also to treat people respectfully and compassionately, knowing oftentimes they have been victims of ill treatment.
Hmm.
And, we have this saying, we didn't invent it, but I'm sure you've heard it, hurt people hurt people.
Hmm.
So until we recognize someone else's hurt and address that, have compassion for that, but also help them address it so that it no longer hurts them, it's only then that we help them to stop hurting others.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And they have to, I don't know how you say this, not get past the hurt, get the help to get past the hurt that was done to them. So they
Right.
can go on to help others. Because I noticed, like, in this field of this realm that we're in, is these people come out as advocates, but they're not ready to. And because they're still hurt and they still hurt people.
Right. Right. Yeah, you're right. A lot of the domestic violence advocates are people who experience that themselves, and they're hurt and they're
Mhm.
angry, and they're passionate about helping others because of their own hurt, but they're also not really in that position of listening and understanding the person on the other side of that transaction. And so you're right. They tend not to be necessarily a good person to help someone who's causing harm.
Mhm.
And so that's also one of the problems that we have in the domestic violence ecosystem is we have a lot of impassioned but pretty angry and bitter people working in that,
Yeah.
wanting to punish someone who fits that category like someone who hurt them, and that's probably not the right person to work with them.
And how do you uh, determine if people want to work with you? How do you find out? How do you vet them? Because everyone's saying, how do I vet people who come on my podcast? And it's by talking to people and interviewing them is how you go through asking the right questions.
Yeah, Marianne, we really don't vet people. If people come to, most people that come to us, most of our clients come to us voluntarily.
Hmm.
Some are mandated by courts and they're trying to fulfill a domestic violence requirement or a mandate, but most of them come to us. Now, are they ready, willing, open to help, to change, to healing? That's really kind of up to them. We try to provide the information and the guidance and a path for change, and they either embrace it or they don't. So
Hmm.
it's not, I don't really look at that as our job to determine whether or not they're available. And a lot of times what I've discovered is we end up planting a seed. Somebody will go through our 10-week program and maybe not participate all that much. And then I'll hear from them a couple of years later and say, hey, I went through the program before and I just wasn't at the right place, or I wasn't in the right mindset. And I'd really like to take it again. So that seed was planted. They know that change is possible. They know that there's a path where they can be successful. And now maybe they're open to it, more ready for it than they were before.
Hmm. So you have the courts send people to you uh, to get instruction, to complete a course. You know how the courts make you go through all these classes, we'll
We
say.
do have some of our clients are court mandated to get help
Hmm.
some programming on domestic violence. The majority of our clients are voluntary. They
Hmm.
find us, they see, hey, this might be helpful. I don't like what I'm doing, don't like what's going on in my relationship with my intimate partner.
Hmm.
And I know I need some help. I need some guidance here. And so that was their motivation for finding us. But again, yeah, we do have some courts that are mandating people to come to a program and then they find ours, and the courts finding that acceptable in some cases. In other cases, no. The courts have state laws and guidelines that have been established that really mandate programs that aren't helpful, but that's part of our criminal justice system, and the laws that exist is that we're shoveling a lot of court mandated people into programs that really don't work, that really aren't helpful because they're starting with the wrong assumptions.
Hmm. Now, with we'll say people that are violent offenders, do you go into prisons and talk to these people?
No, we're, we're not, I don't go out. All of our meetings are on Zoom.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they're not in person. We have a program, an online course that we've recorded that we offer that gets into prisons through a platform called Edovo.
Hmm.
And it's basically a learning education platform. Think like a cable company would be bringing lots of different TV shows to your living room. Well, Edovo is that platform for thousands of jails and prisons across the country. And so our program is on that Edovo. So on that Edovo platform. So we're in prisons that way, but no, I'm not actually going in and doing
Okay.
classes there.
I'm sure that would be hard to do as well. You have to go through a lot of red tape to even do that. You know, do you have women that reach out to you at all with issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm probably 40% of the people that sign up for our group are female, and the other are male. So this is a issue that affects both men and women, both men and women. We know
Mhm.
from the research both men and women can be violent with each other. We know
Mhm.
that men and women are very close to equal when it comes to emotional abuse
Mhm.
perpetrated. And so, yeah, we have lots of women that reach out to us looking for help. I think there's an extra challenge for women because the dominant narrative says domestic violence and abuse is something that we men do. But if you're a
Mhm.
woman and you realize, hey, I'm doing these things, it really is pretty hurtful and harmful to my relationship.
Mhm.
And yet I'm being told by the media, no, this isn't you, it isn't your problem. It can be really confusing. And that's one of those narratives that I really kind of hope to challenge with the story in The Truth About You is that this is not just a man problem, this is a human problem.
Mhm.
And hopefully that encourages women to say, I need to address my bad behavior, and my life is going to be better when I do.
Mhm. I think a lot of people were raised, they didn't have a fair chance in life, some people.
Right.
And whether the situation was they were, raised either by a grandmother or a single parent household, it's unfortunate that sometimes their behaviors will progress the way they were raised.
Yeah, and there's two components to that. The one component is the emotional wounding. Now, it could be as bad as abuse, sexual, physical, emotional abuse that they received. It could be neglect. It could be just a whole confluence of other things. And I take my life, for example. I was raised in a two-parent household. However, my father was an alcoholic. I got yelled at a lot as a kid. Uh, didn't necessarily receive a lot of affection or affirmation from my father, especially. And
Mhm.
so that's not the worst upbringing that one can imagine. And yet, I've been able to unpack in counseling how that affected me and how that affected my behavior later as an adult and in those intimate relationships. And so it could be as bad as abuse or neglect, but it could be a confluence of other things that really still affect us. So that's the first element that happens in childhood. The second part is kind of what you mentioned is that a lot of us didn't have really good role models. We
Mhm.
didn't see our parents or our caretakers using good boundaries, using good conflict management skills, using good emotional control mechanisms. We saw them, just go off on each other and not necessarily control their emotions, blame each other, blame us as kids. And
Mhm.
so we have this model planted in our head of, hey, this is normal. This is how people react. And so it's okay if I react this way. And we don't realize that there is another avenue. There's another path for our behavior that would be a lot more constructive if we just realized it.
Mhm. And it's sad because a lot of people don't even know there are resources like this and Ananias Foundation. They just think they could call their local, what's it, a local abuse hotline.
Right.
And sometimes these hotlines don't even want to be bothered with a person calling in.
Well, one of the things that we continue to hear from people who do find us is there are lots and lots of resources for victims out there.
Mhm.
There are shelters, there are hotlines, there's legal resources, counseling resources, housing resources, clothing resources, all kinds of resources. And that's great. I mean,
Mhm.
victims absolutely deserve our support. But if you're the person that's causing harm, what resources do you have? And a lot of times, hotlines don't really know what to do with you. They'll say, well, you really need to get help. There's a lot of counselors I
Mhm.
hear from clients that don't, if you call them and say, hey, I've been causing a violence or abuse in my relationship, they don't want to talk to you. It's like,
Mhm.
no, I don't do that kind of work. One of the options, and kind of the only option that's held out there, are the mandated batters intervention programs that are out there. Now, again, in a lot of places, those are geared for men, but they don't really help women. So
Mhm.
that's a gap there. But even that in some states, in a lot of states, you have to be arrested
Mhm.
before you can get into the batter's intervention program. Well, if it's emotional abuse, not that's not criminal. That's not going to get you arrested. It still
Mhm.
could be terribly damaging in your relationship. It still should be something that you would want to address, and
Mhm.
these people do. And yet, you know, they they're not qualified to get into the program. And oh, by the way, I happen to know that the program's probably not going to help them a whole lot because it's going to assume that they just think they're entitled and they're
Mhm.
superior and they deserve to get their way. And that's really not what's going on with them. So, yeah, you're right. There's not a lot of resources out there for those of us who cause harm in a relationship, the perpetrators of domestic violence. And that's really unfortunate. And that was really one of my big motivations for starting the Ananias Foundation back in 2017 is to fill that gap because I didn't see anyone else stepping in to do that.
Mhm. And don't you think parents who are listening to this will, look at their children's behaviors if they see poor temper controls, anger issues? I was going through that with one of mine, and I took him to a counselor because it's like we gotta break this cycle.
Yeah.
And poor temper controls, throwing things and picking this up from another adult, not me. But what had happened through probably about a year of counseling, and it was a very good counselor. And I was coming down the hallway, and my boys, they were sharing their room. They had bunk beds. And the youngest one, he threw a toy right on the hardwood floor, like he slammed it. And the one that had been in counseling looked at him and said, "You can't do those things. Your wife isn't going to like it."
Mm.
And
Wow.
I went into my room and I went, "Oh my God, I did my job." But see, I don't think there's parents that are, they're looking at this behavior and they're just walking by, watching the kid throw things. They're tired. They've already worked, shifts, and they can't deal with it. They don't have time to deal with it. I don't know.
Right. You raised such a good point, Marianne, because a lot of the thought behind domestic violence and abuse prevention is to go out and talk to teenagers, teenage boys about egalitarian relationships and
Mhm.
what you can and can't do in a relationship. And that's their idea of preventing domestic violence. But you've really hit the nail on the head there is to notice somebody's behavior. Does this person have trouble controlling their emotions?
Mhm.
And what can we do to help them be able to identify their emotions, but also soothe themselves to help understand that there are other ways of thinking about things that aren't going to create that big of a emotion and aren't going to create that big of a reaction. So really helping kids would in their emotional development and developing good emotional control skills and good
Mhm.
conflict resolution skills would go so much further in preventing future domestic violence than the approaches that we're taking trying to prevent that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, you're absolutely on the right track. I mean, I can relate to this personally because I remember when I was 5 years old throwing a brick at my older sister.
Mm,
Didn't hit her, but I got into trouble, and I remember my parents
mm,
saying, "Oh my, he really has a temper." And that label stuck with me, and it was
mm,
probably thrown out there describing me several times through my childhood. And yet, no one actually did anything constructive to help me understand where my anger was coming from,
mhm,
what my thoughts were that were creating that anger, and to help me manage that. So I just thought that, hey, this is how I'm wired. This is who I am. I have a temper. People
mhm,
should get used to it. They should be,
mhm,
they should accept that about me, and not realizing that there was something that I could do about it.
mm. So they normalized it.
Yeah, and treated it as if there was nothing that they could do as well. And
Mm,
look, I don't want to throw my parents under the bus. They did a really good job in a lot of areas, and they both passed since then.
mm,
But this is one of those areas that I look back and I go, I think if they would have realized what they were missing and how important this was, I think they would have stepped in and done something. But they didn't know.
mhm.
They were doing the best they could as parents, and that was just not something that was on their radar screen.
Right. I think back then, parents didn't do that kind of thing. They didn't seek out counseling for their kids either. Yeah, I
Right.
mean, not to go for our ages, but back then, you just didn't take your kid to a counselor. You just dealt with it.
Right. Yeah, I didn't hear about kids going to counseling then. Not like
Right.
you do now.
Right. And sometimes that's not good either. But that's another podcast. I know that I was watching something on TV about Norway, the Norway prison system, and they have a very low recidivism rate of people coming back because they work with these people and so they don't come back and suck up taxpayer dollars. I don't know why our systems aren't doing the same thing, the same follow that model.
I've read some of that same thing, and really, I think what you're talking about is what is the objective of the criminal justice in prison system?
Mhm,
Is it punishment, which is where we're really centered, or is it reform? Is it helping understand the sources of this bad behavior
mhm,
and working with that individual to heal those sources so that they are no longer, likely to commit those acts of violence or whatever got them into the prison? And unfortunately, our focus is very much on punishment and not
mhm.
nearly enough on reform.
Exactly. And don't you think high schools should also pick up on behaviors as well? Maybe they don't have time to do that. I'm sure they see things in the hallways. I
Yeah,
mean,
boy, I'm not a public educator
no.
or an educator, so I'm not at all qualified to know what they're dealing with and what they're able to do. Um, and I know some schools do a better job than others of recognizing that, channeling the kids to a counselor,
Mhm,
talking to the parents, and other schools are just, overwhelmed with what they already have on their plate, and they're just not able to do that. So, I
mhm,
mean, it's an opportunity, absolutely, if our parents and schools and community and churches are all working together
mhm.
towards the same goal, it will make a huge difference. And
Right.
if we have a school system that can do that, even if the parents don't recognize it or are dropping the ball on their responsibilities, schools could be that source. But
Mhm,
again, I'm not going to lay judgment on schools failing to do that because I'm not in that environment.
Do you think you would take the Ananias Foundation in there and, like how they do just they get everyone in the auditorium and you give a speech on, this type of issue. And would you think schools would go for that? I think they would.
I mean, well, first of all, it's, way bigger than our mission and our resources to expand to do that. And what we're really talking about is developing a good self-esteem, developing
Mm-hmm.
a good positive self-image and acceptance of that. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. And we really try to help people to, understand how that's affecting them and guide them on that path for healing. But, uh, you know, we're starting with people who are open to exploring that because their life is not going well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, to talk to a bunch of high school students who don't feel like they even got a problem, or even for that matter, a bunch of adults who
Mm-hmm.
maybe don't feel like they have that problem. Would it be effective? I'm not sure that it would.
Mm-hmm.
I think that absolutely those kinds of things need to be happening in homes,
Mm-hmm.
especially in homes, but also in schools. Yes, but yeah, that's a much bigger mission than what we have.
Yeah. A big, massive undertaking. You know,
Really, it's just about raising emotionally healthy human beings in our
hmm
society.
and, and I don't know if there's enough of that.
Oh, no, absolutely.
It's both parents are working and they don't want to hear it sometimes.
Sure.
It's something that, you don't know. I mean, like I was watching behaviors and I was like, oh no, we can't go down this path because that is why I had filed for divorce and left. And it's like, is this an inherited trait that is going on, or what do you think? Is it a personality that's inherited?
Gosh, I don't know. That would be difficult to say. I don't know that there's a ton of evidence that personality is so much shaped by inheritance. There probably is some relationship of, how we're wired and just how sensitive we are, how easily triggered we are. There probably are some physiological factors to that. I think we do know that a lot of those are environmental factors.
Mm-hmm.
For again, what we experience, traumas, neglects, that sort of thing to start with, but also then learned behavior of, hey, when I'm feeling upset, what do I see in my family of origin? How do I see my parents handling conflict? How do I feel my parents handling upset? And so, but we also have media, movies, television, where we get to see a whole bunch of other usually pretty poor role models
Mm-hmm.
of handling that. And so, all that's part of our learning, and why we react the way we do is very complex. And our brain has recorded thousands, millions of snippets about the world and what's going on and how to react. And so what comes out in our reaction is really a sort of a mixture, a stew of all of those experiences that we have. So yeah, what happens, what goes into that stew makes a big difference on
Mm-hmm.
what comes out. Whether there's a genetic relationship to that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Now, we were talking earlier on the phone, and you told me you had since remarried, and you've been married a number of years. How long have you been married?
Yeah, so I've been married. My wife Lynn and I celebrated our seventh wedding anniversary
Hmm.
here this last week. So,
Oh,
um,
happy anniversary.
thank you. It feels good to be in a relationship that we're not perfect and
Mhm.
we have conflict, but it's manageable conflict, it's
Mhm.
respectful conflict, and we really enjoy our life together. We enjoy our relationship. And so I would say it has a normal amount of issues, but also it makes a huge difference for me to show up into that relationship in a much more emotionally healthy way where I'm not acting out and lashing out like I did in previous relationships, and
Mhm.
that's made the difference of making this relationship successful.
Do you think that scared her when you met her and you told her this of your past?
That's a really interesting question. And that was a discussion that we had a few weeks after we met. I was very interested in her. She seemed like she was interested in me. And so it was important for
Mhm.
me to tell her
Mhm.
about my past and to just lay it out and be honest. And her reaction was, I guess, maybe a little bit surprising. And she said, if that happens between us, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a relationship ender,
Mhm.
but I don't see that in you yet. And so I will keep watching. But I'm going to give you an opportunity. I'll give you a chance. And she also admitted that she's not a perfect person and she had stuff in her past that she wasn't proud of. And so I think she gave me an opportunity. And even as a single guy dating before I met my wife,
Mhm.
I had that conversation a few times with people. And there were some times where the reaction was, ooh, thanks for telling me, but no thanks, I can't do that. And I just realized that they're
Mhm.
not going to be the right person for me.
Mhm.
But more often than not, people were saying, okay, thank you for telling me.
Mhm.
I kind of the same reaction that my wife Lynn had was, I'll watch. That would be an issue, but I'm not seeing it right now. So I think there are people and a lot of people that are actually willing to believe that people can and do change.
Mhm.
The the narrative that we hear in the public square, especially around domestic violence, is not that.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, certainly some people have adopted that as well. But there are people that are open to realizing that people change,
Mhm.
and they do in other areas. We have alcoholics and drug addicts
Mhm.
who, no longer drink or use. We have people that have committed crimes that are reformed and they're good, upstanding citizens. So people do change,
Mhm.
and I don't know why we would think this issue is any different than any other.
Mhm. And I'm sure you found that there are some people that just don't even want to change.
I think there are people that don't, I don't know that they don't want to change, but maybe they have trouble seeing how how that's going to happen. They don't know how to change. And that can be very frustrating. Look, I know my relationships aren't going well, but I really don't know what to do about that. This is just me. I'm stuck with this just being me.
Mhm.
So I think, and I was in that camp for a long time. And I think there are also people that are a little fearful of changing.
Mhm.
Look, these things that I'm doing to protect myself, I'm protecting myself. What happens if I let go of those? What's going to happen to me if I'm not being tough and abrasive and maybe even aggressive to protect myself? I'm going to be vulnerable again. And so people have to be able to see how they're still okay without putting on those layers of armor of protection.
Mhm. And family support, a lot of people don't have family support. I don't know. Did you have help? Did you have family support? Or did they just don't want to be bothered hearing anything?
You know, I would say the one person that really stands out for me that was supportive was my mother.
Mhm.
Um, but still, all of this is stuff that we have to go through on our own. We have to do the work. We have to, you know, go in and unpack what's going on with us, what's caused this. We have to do that mental work
Hmm.
of understanding our past and reframing our past and learning different habits. So, family support can help a little bit with encouragement, but at the end of the day, we're
Hmm.
all responsible for doing it. And I would say to anyone, if you have family support, fine, but you still have to do the work. And if you don't have family support, do the work. No one else can do it for you.
Right. And it's a lot of work. It's emotionally exhausting because, I've been through counseling. A lot of people have, and you get home from that and it's like, I need a nap. Did you
Sometimes
find
it can, and it can be painful.
that? Hmm.
So it's a little bit like peeling off a Band-Aid. It it
Hmm.
hurts maybe at the
Hmm.
time, and that's also one of the things that holds people back. I don't want to talk about, I don't want to think about those things that happened to me in the past, and yet it's still going to be there and it's still going to be affecting our behavior until we do bring that out into the light of day, give it some oxygen, and give it a chance to heal. Then it won't continue to affect us.
Hmm. And I think, some people hearing this might be resistant, thinking that, oh no, these people don't change. And any domestic violence abuser does not change. But, you know, like you said, Alcoholics Anonymous, drug abusers, you know, change can happen if they really put their minds to it, as you said.
Right. Yeah, it's not an impossible thing to do. I mean, we change behavior in all kinds of areas. Um, yeah, I like to point to myself as someone who is far from perfect,
Mm,
but is able to be in a relationship, in a marriage, and be successful in that.
mm,
And there's not abuse or violence going on in my marriage. So,
mm,
you know, example one, but also hear it from the people that we've worked with, especially when I get to hear from them a few years later, where hey, things are going well.
mm,
Things aren't perfect, but we're doing well. Or better yet, I hear from their partner and say, hey, my partner went through your program. It's made a big difference in our lives. So absolutely, people change, and that's one of the
mm,
narratives that we have around domestic violence that I wanted to address in
mm,
the novel The Truth About You is, do perpetrators change? Can they change? How do they change? Even though that's not a big part of the book, it's certainly introduced and is part of the storyline there. Um, and yeah, it's just being able to, have the right motivation for change and get the right help, the right resources is what really makes the difference. And the problem we've had in domestic violence is that so often we haven't applied the right resources, but also that narrative. And I think domestic violence advocates, people are working with victims, are at least a little bit, maybe a lot of it, responsible for this narrative. You're
mm,
working with someone who's being abused. They don't want to leave the relationship, but they're continuing to be hurt.
mm,
What do you tell those people? You say, that person that's abusing you is never going to change. Give up your hope and get out of this abusive relationship.
mm,
And while that might be successful in getting that person out of the relationship, it's not really telling them the truth about what's possible,
mm.
with the person that's causing them harm.
But then also the person causing them harm might not be ready to, pick up this book and read it, and then they find themselves in divorce court. You know.
Yeah, what we should say is that change is possible, and here's what they're probably going to need to do.
Mhm,
And you should have evidence that not only they've gone through that process of looking at what's driving their behavior, but you should see evidence that their behavior has changed. I don't
mhm,
ever want to just encourage people to blindly trust that this person has changed just because they said they will or they have. You should look for evidence. You should look that they've done some of that work and it's
Mm-hmm.
coming out in their behavior. And if they haven't, absolutely get
Mm-hmm.
yourself to a safe place. And, if that's not happening over time, absolutely justified in getting out of that relationship. On the other hand, we're telling people that people can't change. And when they are working on that and they are changing and they are showing up better, they're still being told, don't trust it. It's not real. They're faking it. They're just trying to get you back, which might be the case, but
Mm-hmm.
it might not be the case. And so, again, the truth is not being told. It should be you need to have good discernment here about whether this person has made the changes.
Mm-hmm. So then you're saying, well, time will tell the tale. And you think people should probably date for 4 years straight before they get married so they can see any type of behavior patterns.
Yeah, I don't know about 4 years. My counselor told me
Uh-huh.
2 years to look for those. But the reality is that people change throughout their entire life, and you could see absolutely no evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you're dating somebody in your 20s and you marry and it goes along and they change and you change and
Mm-hmm.
the world changes and that behavior can change. Usually
Mm-hmm.
we can identify those things early on and see that this person's carrying some baggage that they still need to address before they're ready to be safely in a relationship. But again, the reality is that people can and do change, and they will. The person we marry is not the person I married 7 years ago is not the same person I'm married to now,
Mm-hmm.
and she could say the same thing.
Right. And when people are dating, if they see any signs of violence, even though it's emotional abuse, do you have people that contact you when they're dating someone, they're kind of getting serious, maybe they're going to marry them? Do you get any phone calls of like, I don't know about this one. What do you think?
Yeah, typically, I'm not hearing from people who are evaluating someone else. More likely, I'm hearing from someone that's, I realize that even though we're not married, some of this bad behavior is coming out. I realize it's causing problems in my relationship. It's getting in the way. I'm concerned about that.
Mhm.
I think I need to address this. And it looks like you might have a program that will help me do that.
Mhm. And it's so important to have this out there. And, with this issue that people just jump all over once they hear, someone has been violent, then everybody seems to run with it. And there's no like hope for this person.
Right. It's the scarlet letter, it's the permanent damnation.
Hmm.
And, you know, the other part of that is if I'm in a relationship and for whatever reason I don't want to be in this relationship anymore, one of the sinister ways that people use to justify getting out of that relationship is they say, oh, well, my partner was abusive. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe they were, maybe they weren't. If they were, absolutely, that makes sense. But we've overplayed this. And so now everybody's a narcissist. Everybody is stonewalling us. Everybody is gaslighting us. Everybody is abusive that we don't like. And
Hmm.
that, um, because what you just said, that term, we just say this person is abusive. And what we've done is we've communicated this whole package of horrible, evil traits,
Hmm.
and we've ascribed them to the person. And, you know, what's somebody going to say to that?
Hmm.
Well, yes, dear, I understand why you wouldn't want to be in that relationship. Um, and so it's just an easy pass. So we do find that there's a lot of false allegations
Yes,
around
yes.
abuse.
Mhm.
And those are unfortunate. And again, all of this needs to be sorted out. Just because someone says somebody's abusive, maybe they are, maybe they're not.
Mhm.
It's not a pass. It should never be an excuse for those of us who are causing harm. We should take a hard look at ourselves. What am I doing that might be causing harm?
Mhm.
But just because somebody claims that you're abusive doesn't necessarily make it so.
And the problem with that is with the false allegations is people just jump on that bandwagon too and believe everything they hear.
Right. Right. And we're also told don't question it. If
Mhm.
someone says that they are being abused, believe them.
Mhm.
Well, I understand the motivation again of protecting real victims that, if they're saying they're being abused and we're not compassionate, we're not giving them help, that's not good. But, are they necessarily telling us the truth?
Mhm.
And are they truly being abused? And especially when it's being used against someone, either criminal charges or ruined reputation,
Mhm.
parental alienation. There's all kinds of legal and social implications of calling someone abusive, even though
Mhm.
that they're not. And Marianne, one of the interesting research pieces that I've come across is that social scientists have studied this and they've interviewed people about their behaviors and their behaviors in their intimate relationships and asked them, have you done this? Have you done that? 25% of us have done things that would be considered domestic violence, physical
Mhm.
violence in our intimate relationships. One out of four of us. That's a lot of people. And when we're
Mhm.
talking about emotional abuse, 80% of us have done those things. And so it's easy to say, well, this person is abusive, but I mean, that pretty much describes all of us at some time or another in at some level. So again, that it's one of those terms that has become a very popular hot button, accusation. I'm going to accuse somebody of being abusive, and then you're going to understand why I'm getting out of the relationship with them, and you're going to think badly of them.
Mhm.
And it's just being terribly overused and misused.
Oh, I agree because I mean, I was falsely accused of emotional abuse, which I was exonerated from, but then 4 days later, after being exonerated, there was another false allegation of emotional abuse because these people don't know when to quit. Okay. Which is another podcast. But, I was exonerated of that. So we've got to be careful when, I mean, people cannot be throwing out these false allegations willy-nilly.
Mhm. The story in The Truth About You is about this couple. The man's arrested for domestic violence, and yet the couple stays together. And the mother and her two daughters and the stepfather are the main characters in here. And when mom stays with the stepfather, her two
Mm,
20-something-year-old daughters are wondering, what do we need to do to protect mom? What's going
mm,
on there? Why is she staying? And then what do we need to do to protect her? And so their idea in the story, hopefully I'm not giving too much of the plot away. Their idea is to install hidden cameras in mom's house.
mm,
And so they can actually watch what's going on and not just take, uh, you know, I think the original idea is we're going to capture our stepdad doing these abusive things and we're going to expose him. But
mm,
what they see is a relationship that's far more complex,
mm,
that has nuances and no clear villain and victim in the relationship.
mm,
And one of the daughters embraces that as the truth of the complexity of violent and abusive relationships, and the other one wants to cling to the original narrative of no, it's him, he's the bad guy. So that's a little bit of the setup of The Truth About You, but it really is
mm.
trying to challenge the reader to see these relationships as far more complex and far less
Hmm.
clear cut than just one person's story. Because what the mother in the story, Paula, says is going on isn't exactly accurate,
Hmm.
and it maybe isn't accurate at all. And so you have this he said, she said, where what's being said about what's going on in the relationship and what they're actually seeing is going on are two different things.
Right, right. I mean, when I was a nurse on the psych unit, um, we had a staff member who would deliberately rile patients up, which,
Mm.
in my opinion, is a form of domestic violence. Because one of the other nurses warned me, watch out for that one because they will get that patient riled up, and then you're going to have to call security. So even people that instigate that type of behavior, right?
Mm.
You know, it's
Well,
almost,
and especially in an intimate relationships, we know each other so well. We know those buttons. We know
mhm,
those those wounds, and we know how to get to them. And so, yeah, if you have somebody who's intentionally going after that, trying to get the
mhm,
reaction, and then when they get the reaction, they say, "See, this is who I said you were. This is, why I think you're such a horrible person." It
mhm.
it really is kind of a setup.
Right, the
Doesn't make it
gaslighting.
Yeah, and it doesn't make it okay for the person to react poorly, but oftentimes that's the kind of dynamic that's going on in a relationship that's deemed abusive.
Mhm. Yeah, do you have in this book, do you have any examples of reactionary abuse?
I'm going to leave that for the reader to
Okay.
decide. Is that reactionary abuse or is it just abuse?
Hmm.
And what we tell our clients is regardless of what your partner is doing, including if they're doing really hurtful, nasty things to you, we're all responsible for how we respond.
Hmm.
Now, if that's going on, let your partner know, absolutely, this is not okay what you're doing. Set some boundaries. We talk about that concept. We talk about enforcing those boundaries, like following through on what you said you were going to do if that boundary is violated.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, we're responsible for how we respond to that. So I will say I'm not a big fan of reactionary abuse because the reality is that we're all reacting to something. Maybe
Hmm.
I'm reacting to a wound that I had in my childhood. That's reactionary abuse. Or maybe I'm reacting to a wound I had in this relationship. But at the end of the day, we all have to be responsible for our reactions.
Well, that's true. We're all responsible for what we do to other people,
Right.
And I'm glad you wrote this book because it sounds very fascinating, and people need to realize that, you know, there change can happen.
It can.
Hmm. Now, how can people reach you if they have any questions?
Yeah. So you can reach me on my author website, which is, I think I sent you the link, uh,
Is
michaelclarkauthor.com.
okay.
I don't know that I've got that one memorized. And there's contact information down there at the bottom, including my email address. Or check out the other website that I have, the organization that I founded, the Ananias Foundation, and there's contact information there as well of getting a hold of me. So
Okay.
yeah, it would be. I spend a fair amount of my time responding to people's emails and questions. So
Hmm.
uh, it may be a few days before I get around to it
Hmm.
with the other things that I have going on, but I do try to answer stuff.
Well, I'm glad we talked because it's great to talk to someone who's trying to bring forth change. Because there's so much depressing things in our world. It's nice to know that someone is trying to help other people and to change the situation.
Well, Marianne, thank you. And my view as well, it's easy to sit back and say, this is wrong. This is unjust. This shouldn't be how the world works.
Mhm.
Um, it's quite another thing to say, what can I do to make things better? And that's really what I've tried to do for the last 8.5, almost 9 years here is to make a difference. I really believe that, what we
Mhm.
do at the Ananias Foundation, even though we're working with perpetrators,
Mhm.
people that are causing harm, is really about protecting victims. Because, you know, what better way to protect a victim than to help a person who's causing them harm to change and to
Mhm.
stop hurting them? Or even if that person leaves, that that person who is causing harm so often is out of that relationship, but they get into another one and now there's another victim. And
Mhm.
so what we can do is go to the source and help address domestic violence at the source. And that's what we try to do.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad to interview you. Thank you so much.
It's
Um,
been a pleasure.
oh yeah, and if you have any updates, you're welcome to come back. And don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google, and other platforms I don't even know about. Again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. Thank you so much, Michael Clark, and your book, The Truth About You. Everyone should go out and get it and see what it's about. So thank you so much.
Marianne, thanks so much for having me.